Okay, I think the previous video was the longest video I've made so far. It's over 2 hours, I think 2.5 hours long on the latest Hohokam point. Now I made this one here off camera a while ago, but I don't think it looks quite right, so I'll be modifying it in this video. I'm gonna want to make it look more like this one here, where these large serrations stop, about midpoint, and then the rest of the blade is narrow, very narrow. So there's a lot of variation in these Hohokam points, or Snaketown, as they're also called. So I have pictures from various locations on these as far as my sources. So I'll just modify this one real quick here. Most of the stone I'm using is heat treated. I think this one is too. Now the thing to watch out for, of course, on these is breakage. If I don't use a domed pad, the odds of breaking the point go up exponentially. And by domed, I mean my typical pads are rounded in both directions. You know what I mean? This one's a flat pad, which works pretty good in most cases, but it still has a little bit of flex, so it can lead to snapping, especially on these long narrow points. So the domed pad comes in handy. I've always used them, of course, but it comes in especially handy for these long narrow points. Now, I was having difficulty in the past with these because I didn't have my pressure flaking technique quite down yet, and I didn't have some of the tools available that I have now. I'm using these short tines. Now, these are from the antler that's close to the skull. These are the brow tines, which are the hardest part of the antler, I think. And I've made them short enough so that I can use the back end against my hand for inward pressure. You know what I mean? And then opposing pressure with my other thumb. Now that seems to work well. Or, I use the old standby, this technique here with a pressure flaker. I call this a transverse pressure flaker because it's not in line with the handle. It's transverse or crosswise, because I'm able to put on more of a torque on the pressure flaker in this direction, which comes in handy for long flakes. Short flakes can be made with any kind of tool. It doesn't need to be anything special, but for long thinning flakes and for these very difficult to punch out serrations where the spaces in between, I need a lot of leverage. Okay, so the transverse pressure flaker works well. Now, it's been kind of wet outside. The antler is kind of soft, so it's been difficult to get the antler to stay smooth. It gets all cut up and chipped and damaged very easily during damp and wet weather. So that's one of my challenges. The dampness doesn't go very far into the antler, so it doesn't take much to take off that soft, spongy outer coating that it develops during rainy weather or during high humidity. If you live in an area with high humidity, the outer surface of your antler is always going to be a little bit damp and spongy, so you'll have to smooth off or sand off that gooey outer coating. So yeah, this is Seems to work well with the downward and inward pressure. Like I said, I can get the inward pressure against my hand. And then the downward pressure. Of course, after a while these will get very short and I won't be able to use them like this. I'll have to mount them in a handle or something as they get shorter. But for now I can use it like this. And they're very quick to make. This one I think I split in half so I can get 2 pressure flakers out of it. I don't think I have the other half, but they're pretty thick, some of them, so you can cut them in half a lot of times and get 2 pressure flakers. And one of the best techniques that I have found is to use a semicircular point on that with kind of like a chisel or a wedge. Side view, tapering down, kind of flat. Then I got to be careful not to press on a delicate spot because it'll step fracture. I got to make sure the edge is stout enough for me to put pressure on it. And sometimes I'll just kind of peck at it to strengthen the edge. Very, very short flakes. Now I was noticing in my video, well, I was having some issues with the flakes stopping halfway. I'd push a flake and it'd stop at the halfway point and create a step fracture because of the pressure from the pad. You know what I mean? You push off a flake and the flake goes in a little ways and then it kind of meets resistance against the pad because I'm pushing it up against the pad and there's no channel in it, so there's no freedom for the flake to go. But I kind of like it that way, where there isn't freedom for the flake to travel because it often overshoots and takes off the other edge. So it's a trade-off. Sometimes I got to deal with the step fractures in the middle. This kind of thing. And just live with it. But if I'm careful, I can create a nice median ridge on the pad because the flakes will stop pretty much where the point is touching the pad. Especially if I'm just taking off very shallow, very thin flakes, they stop easily. The pad will stop them easily. So when I'm doing the pressure flaking on these larger flakes with more pressure, I'm trying not to push into the pad. I'm trying to push more against the pressure flaker so that when it does pop, there's not much pressure downward, so it'll carry the flake hopefully at least a little bit past halfway. Now I was getting a couple overshots earlier. Like I took a lot off one edge. I'm not sure if it was this one. I mean, this is a little bit asymmetrical, I'm not sure, but I did get an overshot somewhere there because I was putting an enormous amount of inward pressure. So that's the danger of that. Now this one is heat treated. When it's a heat treated stone, you're not always going to get consistent results. These lighter areas are tougher than the darker area. And I had to use a stone pressure flaker to get this neck narrow. Still didn't get it as thin in cross section as I wanted, but I had to use this rhyolite flake pressure flaker to power through that stall that I had on one of these indentations, and it worked okay. But again, you know, I was having issues with the pad, causing the flakes to terminate halfway and not go past halfway, and I ended up with some thickness that I didn't want. But it's still okay. It adds to the strength of the point. It's just a little more difficult to haft. That's all. You have to use. I'm going to have to use a very strong wood to haft this if I want a nice transition. You know, a strong wood so that the sides of that notch will be thin. So it won't be like a large transition between the stone and the wood. If I used a weak piece of wood, the other sides will have to be thick so that it won't wobble too much. You know what I'm saying? The sides of the notch or the I don't know, the pieces of wood that stick out beyond the void. I don't know how to explain it, but you know what I mean. Those had to be thick with a delicate wood. With a stronger wood like hickory, you can thin it down a lot. Okay. So I don't really mind talking during the video, but I like to let the video do the explaining without having to talk, because a lot of times the explanation isn't going to be accurate, even though it seems like it's accurate. Like I can tell you what I'm doing and this is the reason why this is happening or that's happening, but it may not always be accurate. Like I think I might be doing it a certain way, and actually what's happening is something different. Or I may say that this is a good way to do it when there are many other ways to do it. And my way might not be the best way. Or the way that I'm showing it in the video might not be the best way to achieve the result that I'm trying to get. Sometimes it's expedient, and I might make excuses for myself and say, well, this is a good way, I've got experience, blah, blah, blah. But what I'm doing is I'm napping to match my explanation instead of using my explanation to match the napping. You know what I mean? I think there is a danger where if I really don't know what's going on, to say something about the napping that really is just my interpretation and not really what's happening. Now on these, the barbs get progressively smaller as you go near the tip. You know, these serrations start out pretty wide and then or pretty deep compared to the barbs sticking out, and then it tapers. They get smaller and smaller, these barbs sticking out. So that's what I'm trying to do on this one here. It's still kind of a little bit too pointy. The sides get parallel, so I need to take it down a little bit more. They get parallel pretty fast coming off these barbs, and I'm not seeing a central median ridge on this one, whereas I think a lot of these had median ridges going down the point. And the one way to get that median ridge is to start early, plan on it, get your thickness carefully done, and then as you're just tediously picking at the edges, that median ridge will form naturally, as long as you don't have to keep manipulating the thickness. If you got the thickness already established, just the act of pressure flaking to get the shape will drive flakes usually to the middle, and you'll get that median ridge naturally. You won't have to think about it too much. So early preparation is pretty critical on these. You don't want to do a lot of heavy pressure or damage control toward the end where you're trying to fix a thick spot, because a little bit too much pressure and you can snap the point so easily. And any flaw in the edge will cause a weak spot. And if you're really pushing hard to get those flakes off, you will snap it. And sometimes you won't snap it where you're pushing, it'll snap up further, where the vibrations kind of amplify as they go out, and you'll get a snap further up. Now, I don't do a lot of grinding on the edges. I usually try to avoid that because it distracts me. If I'm having to get one of these other tools and constantly do the grinding and putting it back and forth, I get distracted, and I'm finding that the anxiety level goes up with the more tools that I had to swap out, and I lose my place sometimes, or lose my train of thought. Not only because it's a different tool, but also because it takes more time. So I kind of go in and out of the zone too much if I'm using too many different tools, but sometimes I have to. And I'll switch out tools if I'm not getting the results I want, just to try it out. I'm not really sure which tools will work the best, so I'll just swap it out. And sometimes just the act of swapping refreshes my brain enough so that I'm not napping with a lot of anxiety. Because if you get flustered and you start napping in a kind of an angry way, that leads to a lot of breakage. And a lot of these step fractures when you're not paying attention, like I wasn't paying attention there. I should have probably, instead of coming in directly, come in from this angle here to remove a flake. Come in like this at an angle to try to get a flake off, instead of trying to power directly into that step. I think there was a little step beforehand, then just made it worse. But what I'm trying to do is get these sides parallel, and then I'll move on to the next one. And that worked okay. I did get some of that step off, but it didn't get all of it. Now, many of these flakes, it's more of a downward pressure than an inward. But I got to be careful because that downward pressure really strains the stone and it can snap easily. If it wasn't for the domed pad, it would probably be broken by now. I don't know if I'll be able to get that little step out there, but I'll see what happens. Yeah, I'm just going to have to live with that. Now, why they were so delicate, they were probably used, or probably intended to be used only once, where most of the arrowhead would remain within the target, either snapping off at the base or snapping somewhere up a tip and causing an infection. It's long-term damage. These things appear to be designed for long-term damage or secondary infection. Because you don't really need a fancy thing like this for hunting. Alright, so I think that's good enough for now. I've pretty much stalled that area. But if I can make it a little more narrow there, it looks more like it would look more like the picture. There really is no easy way to do this when you don't have a copper or metal pressure flaker. You just kind of have to live with the limitations of the antler. You could use a graver or something, or stone to power through, but I'm running the risk, when I use stone, of snapping the whole thing. Yeah. Oh, I did get that small flake off just now. I may be able to come back. Hit the other side. Oops. I kind of crushed the platform. It's working, but I see that little step I just created. Those are frustrating. Yeah, most of these barbs look like they're turning downward, so that's why I'm knapping the bottom of these notches, or bottom of the serrations, so it looks like they are turning downward. Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Now this one here is something I was working on off camera, and I didn't like the way it was turning out, so I just discarded it. I'm going to go back to this one and just modify it into one of these types of Hohokam points, where you have large barbs with large spaces in between. So this video is going to be mostly pressure flaking. Now I've got two main pressure flakers that I've been using. This one here, I thought it was antler, but I think it's cow bone. This one definitely is antler, elk antler. This might be elk antler, but it feels very, very hard, so it feels more like cow bone. And it's very slippery, but it has that hardness that I'm needing. So I'm liking the this pressure flaker. And the softer your pressure flaker, the more it grabs the edge. But you also run the risk of grabbing it too much and then causing a snap. So a hard pressure flaker is a little bit easier on the workpiece if it's very thin like this. At least in my experience. That's going really fast. The good thing about these Hohokam points is that they are asymmetrical. You don't have to worry too much about being perfectly symmetrical. The barbs don't even match up with each other in many cases on the sides. They may be opposed, but they're not exactly in line. See, like this one here, these barbs in the middle are a little bit off. It's not perfectly symmetrical. And they're not even the same size. Like this barb on that side is, wider than that one. And the base is not totally straight. And these, I don't know if these corners have been broken off or if they've made them rounded off that way on purpose. So I'm just going to go with the flow and see what happens with this particular piece. It's pretty fragile. It's just under the cortex. So you have two different consistencies. This nice material here and this kind of powdery, steppy material just under the cortex. I say powdery, I think I meant crusty. Kind of chalky. I really don't need to do too much thinning anymore. I can just do the shaping, and then while I'm shaping I can hope that the flakes that I'm sending in will naturally take care of the thick spots and stuff. Yeah, on these we have another situation where the tip is nice and long. You know, these have long tips, so I'll do like 3. Well, basal ears and then 2 barbs. Let's see. It's still a little wide. I try to print out the drawings to scale so that I don't have to guess. So I do waste a little bit of paper and ink and all that to do several printings so that they are to scale. I could, I guess, glue the paper to a card stock, right, and then make cutouts or cut out the arrowheads so that I have little card stock templates that I can use. I've been thinking about doing that instead of having these pieces of paper awkwardly being shown in the videos. It'd be better to have a little card stock arrowheads. It takes up less space too, but those take time to cut out because you want to get all the serrations perfectly cut out so that the measurements are right. Because there's such little subtle details that if you don't get them right, it just doesn't look like the real thing. So if your templates are off, your reproductions are going to be off. I've gotten a little bit better at the pressure flaking, but I'm finding, you know, the maintenance on these tools is much more intense than with metal. And I don't know if it's me, but I think I tend to wear these down more than average, more than the average napper. Because I'll go through pressure flakers pretty fast. And I like these chisel type tips with a semicircular or oval side view, because as you're pushing in, you know, you're getting this kind of thing going on, right? So you want to maintain the same direction of applied force. You're pushing inward also. So if you round these off, should even be more rounded than that. It really doesn't matter if you're pushing in and this happens to dip a little bit. You're still applying the force in the same direction, especially if it's semicircular. It doesn't really matter how much this moves. As long as you got inward pressure and that's consistent, you can pretty much get the same flake at this angle or this angle. You know what I mean? You just got to figure out where to start and which angle to put your pressure flaker. If you think you're going to dip down, you know, you're going to start, you know, with this pressure flaker angling this way, so that if you think you're going to dip down, then it'll push off the flake at that point. You don't want to start here and then go way down. You know what I mean? But yeah, the roundedness gives you a little bit of leeway. Because the goal is to keep it as still as possible. Keep this workpiece as still as you can. But you can't always do it, especially when you start getting a little bit of cramp in your fingers. So right now I'm just preparing the edge to do some heavy pressure to get rid of that lump. This is when it'll move a lot if you put a lot of pressure on it. That wasn't too bad. I was hoping for something a little better. But yeah, I didn't apply enough inward pressure on that one. I can probably get it later because I got to go in pretty far for those indentions between the serrations or between the barbs. Let's see. I guess I should start doing those now so I know where I'm going. They'll give me some options on thinning once I know where these indentions are going to be, so I can send some thinning flakes in from the middle of these indentions. I think some of these bases were concave, so I can also send in a couple thinning flakes from the base. The neck is pretty narrow on these. Let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna have to go in a lot further. But what I'll do is I won't go in that far with this pressure flaker. I'll just kind of do the heavy work with it, and then once it gets thin enough, I can just pressure with a lighter flaker, one of the transverse ones. Like this one here, I can just do the finish work with that. Once the middle is thin enough, I'm trying to do a little thinning, but I don't really need to do that much thinning. In fact, I could just probably pressure flick the whole thing now without having to worry about thinning, except for this little area here where I want to get rid of that step fracture looking spot. Should do that now before it gets too far along. There's a danger of breaking off these ears when you're pressure flaking. It'll touch the pad. Again, it didn't travel far enough, although I did put lots of pressure on it. I'm going to have to notch that and see. Get it from that indentation. And just be really aggressive. Got the bottom, a little bit of the bottom part, but I'm going to go up a little further. That's about where the next barb is going to be. That one released a little bit too easily. I wasn't able to put enough pressure on that to make it travel, so I may have to just press on that barb. See if I can run a flake there, but I'm going to have to dull that barb quite a bit. Yeah, that's good enough. Took quite a bit off of that bar, but I've still got a lot of width, so it probably won't matter. Getting a lot of crunching, which is not good, but it doesn't matter too much right now because I've already done most of the thinning. So, and my barbs are not going to be symmetrical, it looks like. Okay, so actually two barbs and then the ears, so everything else is going to be nothing but point. Okay, so this is the point where I'm most likely to break it, I think, is trying to get that neck really narrow here to start my reference point for how everything else is going to go. Because the neck width is pretty consistent all the way up, you know, the distance between the barbs. It is wider at the bottom. It does taper as it goes up the blade, but it starts out pretty narrow. I'll switch over to the other pressure flaking tool in a minute. This one doesn't wear out as fast, and since these indentations are pretty wide, I can use this thicker one. And the bottom of these indentations are squared off. Right? Yeah. My barbs are actually closer together than the real one. That's okay. If I hit a stall, I just kind of zigzag it to get back into the bottom of that stall. Sneak up on it. Kind of blew away a lot of that barb, but I think the real one looks like that too. Okay, switch to the other tool so I can get some better leverage on this. It's not as easy to see what I'm doing as far as overall shape with this tool because I'm, you know, holding it with my fingers. With the other tool, I can kind of look and see the overall shape as I'm doing it. But it's so much easier to press off flakes with this tool. And I'm pretty sure everything was pretty thin on the edges, so I'm going to make sure there's no real thick spots on the edges on any of these barbs or ears. But they were not really neat and tidy. They looked like they were rushed, quickly made. Looks like they made a bunch of these at once. So I don't need to be really neat and tidy with this flaking. You got to be careful to keep these sides somewhat parallel, or it's not going to look right. If it gets too pointy, you know, if it tapers too much, it doesn't look right. You got to keep the sides kind of parallel. So I have to watch for that. On these, I think the sides were smooth. Oops. Took a little bit too much off the point right there. Let's see. Need to watch what I'm doing, so I'm going to go back to this pressure flaker. It's kind of hard to get that point centered. I want to finish before the 30-minute mark. Okay. So I'll do a last run of flakes. I'm just going to leave it like that. You know, it's got a lot of the original flake scar on that side, but I'm not going to try to flake the whole thing. You know, I could run nice fancy flakes down to try to get that median ridge again, but I'm just going to leave it. I do see a median ridge in the sketch. Toward the tip, there's a median ridge. It's 30 minutes, so I'll just continue it. Okay. All right, now that I restarted the video, I can kind of take my time and do some very intentional pressure flaking on this side. Got to be very careful because this is delicate, obviously. But at the same time, I don't want to be holding back too much. It looks better when you have a lot of bold flaking. You can't be shy and then pick. If you want bold flaking, you just got to go for it. Just poke myself with that barb. Yeah, it's kind of crusty there. Hopefully I can power through this crusty area. Just needs to be a little more narrow. Yeah, the bottom of that needs to be a little sharper. The base of these barbs are kind of at a 90-degree angle to the blade. You know what I mean? I got a notch in there, a little bit sharper. Okay, I almost got it. Just a little bit more. I want to get in here and make it a little bit sharper in that corner. I may have made it a little bit too sharp. Pressure flaker a little bit too sharp. There we go. Still a little bit thick in this area here. Right there. Right in this area, there's a thick spot. I don't know if I want to mess with it. Yeah, it didn't go past halfway, so it didn't really make a difference. So I'm just going to sharpen the tip and we should be good. Good enough. Let's see. Well, this barb here looks a little bit too short, right? It looks like there's a little bit too much mass on this side too. I need to make that indentation a little deeper. See, the match, it's got to match this up here or go in a little bit further. Same on the other side, looks like. So let me deepen that. That'll make this barb stick out more, and then it'll match the picture better. I think I've stalled it there. So get the piece of stone out and see. No, I don't know if I'll be able to press off a flake there. Not even sure I made much difference. Yeah, that's good enough. A lot of nitpicky work for such a small, seemingly insignificant point. But yeah, to get it to look right is quite a challenge sometimes. Okay, I'm going to do one more here. So yeah, that's good enough for that one. Okay, I found this piece of stone in my rock pile, so I thought it looked kind of interesting, the color, so I'm going to try to remove a flake for the next one. The next one's going to be small, probably a small point. This is heat treated also. Just taking a little bit off to get the feel for it. Feels pretty brittle. That was a miss. I didn't mean to take off so little. Same with that. Another miss. There we go. That's good for a larger point down the road. Feels a little brittle. I kind of want to save this for something else. I don't really need a big flake for this next one. This one might work. Yeah, it'll probably work. There is a crack, or two cracks. I removed that one. Let's see if I can. No, that's too small. Let's see. Cortex looks kind of nasty on this one. Looks like a lot of cracks. Should just try to biface it and see what I can come up with as far as flakes. See, you got cracks. Yeah, I would like to say that indirect percussion works every time for what I want to do, but sometimes on that particular pressure flaker, or on that indirect percussion flaker, I'm having a little bit of difficulty with the stability. It's kind of loose in the haft, so I'm having to adjust it a lot, and it's kind of wobbly, so it doesn't impart very much pressure, or very much force, I should say. I lose some of the energy. This is a flake I already got off another piece before, but let's see. I really want to try this because it's translucent. Sometimes the translucent stone is pretty delicate. Well, I want to see how it works with these Hohokam style points. That would have been a nice flake. Yeah, this stuff's way too brittle. Let's try this one. Looks a little more friendly. Yeah. I've seen some of those snake tongue points made of translucent material, and you gotta have a lot of patience for those. Apparently, at least with the stone that I have, the translucent stuff is very delicate or very brittle. This one is not translucent stuff, although you can probably see light through the edges. There's a soft part and a hard part on this percussion flaker, so I need to use the hard surface for the tough spots, and I can use the softer one sometimes if I think I need to grip onto the edge more, but it tends to work better if I just stick with hitting on the hard part of the antler, or hitting with the hard part of the antler. Usually I can send in some good thinning flakes from the base. But I think this bulbar percussion, or this end was very shattered from the original flake. The original flake removal. And what that means is, if it's very shattered on the proximal end, they call it, of the flake, where the bulbar percussion is, you're not going to be able to remove that bulbar percussion easily, because the cracking and shattering is going to make it unpredictable. go to the old standby and zigzag it. It usually works. Now I'm not hitting below center line on most of this stuff, in case you didn't notice. See how I'm way above center line? Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I really don't have a good explanation why sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. A lot of times a bulb of percussion, will scoop out a lot of that mass. Even if you're hitting above center line, it'll get under a big mass and it'll scoop it out, but sometimes it won't. See how low the edge is, and I'm trying to hit it into that mass. It works sometimes. And I've seen artifacts, preforms, where they've attempted to do that also, but they ended up with a big lump, an island in the middle. And you do that to preserve the width, to try to get a good wide piece out of it. But it looks like I'm going to have to take down this edge. I can also zigzag inward. A lot of times you can send in flakes. When you zigzag, you can send in flakes to thin it out. Even if you're hitting below or above center line, in this case, zigzagging works pretty good. It's very forgiving of that center line thing. Unless you grind too much, and then I'm not able to remove a flake here. If you strengthen the edge too much, you can't remove the flakes. Now, one thing, hitting on the tip really hard is not a good idea, but I'm having to because it's kind of not cooperating. I don't know if it's because it's wobbly. Maybe I'm losing a lot of energy in that percussion flaker. Yeah, I think I'm losing a little too much energy there, so I'm going to go to something more sturdy. Even though this is a big surface area, I can still get in there, I think. Yeah, see, I was losing too much energy with the other flaker. Yeah, that's much better. So I've got to firm up the other flaker, or just make another insert. Let's see. Make another insert so it doesn't wobble. I can feel it wobbling in there. Maybe you can hear that. preparation time in these preforms. Oops. Yeah, because it's the end result is pretty delicate, so you want to prepare the preforms as well as you can. Give yourself some space so that if you do crack it during percussion or whatever, you can remove those cracks as you get toward the final shape. Percussion will send in a lot of radial cracks. You can't really see them until it's too late. So, you pressure those away, or try to. Or if you do use percussion toward the ending of the finished piece, make sure you don't hit too hard. The more force you use, the more radial cracks you get, or the cracks that go straight in, kind of perpendicular to the blade, and then they will continue. If you stress it anywhere, those cracks that are going in will continue and just go across, and you'll have the snapped point. Pressure flakers sometimes do that too, but not as often as a percussion, in my experience anyway. I am getting a little bit of bending on the bone here, but not too much. And flexibility is kind of important with the pressure flaker, but it's not vital. You can have a very stiff pressure flaker. Again, it's just a matter of getting used to it. You can pretty much do any kind of, or do short flakes with any kind of tool. The long flakes on this, a lot of it depends on your inward pressure, and if you follow up with the inward pressure, you should be fine. Even though you don't have much flexibility, you can get used to it being not so flexible, and then just compensate for it. The way I flint knap, I tend to adjust my tools to the stone instead of building areas on the stone to match my tools. I don't like to build special platforms or special edges to match my tools. I just kind of adapt to what my tool is doing. I'll swap it out if it's not doing what I want. Instead of manipulating the stone itself, I'll just swap out tools and see if something else works or whatever. I don't know if I picked that habit up early or late. I can't remember. I might have started with the idea that I need to prepare special platforms for each type of tool. But nowadays I don't really worry about that. I'm just going to see what the tool is doing. If it's working, it's working, that's fine. If it's not working, I'll swap it out. Getting risky now to use a lot of force on it. I think I'm going to have some difficulty with that cortex, but maybe if I just get in a little closer, I'll be able to power some pressure flakes across that. Probably didn't grind it enough. Still not too bad. I'm going to probably lose a little bit of that tip because it's kind of curved. We'll see. It's not too bad. Almost got it. I think I can get it as I pressure flake more into this, into the final shape. I can probably run some flakes across that. So I'll continue with this one. It's looking kind of crude, but I think I can get it. I got 2 boxes over here on the side. I need to reduce it down to 1. This is where I need that tiny percussion flaker. I can really thin it down well with the small percussion flaker. We'll see. If I sharpen this, I can probably get in there with some better pressure, but then, you know, that's just more wear and tear. More wear and tear on my tool. Okay. Yeah, the more you modify your tools, the faster they wear down. And since I tend to favor modifying the tools instead of the workpiece, my tools get used up fairly quickly. Well, it's not going so well. You need to go across the piece. Those flakes need to be running a little bit further. I'm running out of good stone. There's a lot of cortex on that side. So if I take too much off of the good side, where the good stone is, I'll end up having to nap a lot of crusty cortex toward the end, which is not good, because that will lead to a snap. If I have too much cortex in the material at the very end of the napping, it could lead to a snap. This cortex is not flexible at all. It's very prone to snapping. I'm using a lot of what I call aggressive pressure instead of passive. You know, I'm forcing the flakes off instead of pushing and then waiting for it to snap off on its own. I'm doing a lot of aggressive pressure, just because I think it might work better. Sometimes when I do the passive pressure thing, it ends up crushing the edges. Whereas if I'm a little more aggressive and go a little bit higher up on the edge and then really press them off with a lot of force, I can, you know, send longer flakes and stuff across the workpiece. But many times when you're trying to do long flakes, the passive pressure will work very well. You know, soft support, well, relatively soft with a lot of passive pressure, just waiting for that flake to release on its own, can lead to some really nice long flakes. But for a piece like this that I'm having trouble holding on to, I'm just being aggressive with it. There, that wasn't too bad. Okay, I've got most of the shaping done. Now it's just a matter of very refined technique for the rest of the flaking. It's going to be quite small. All right. Yeah, I got plenty of room if I want to do one of these tiny ones. Maybe I'll do that one there. I might even have enough for, yeah, I'll do one in between these two here. See, I still have plenty of width, so I can probably still get that done. The bases are a little funny. I think no, I can still do it. It has a little point in the center. This is where I should be taking my time with that passive pressure. If I'm too aggressive, I can just snap the whole base off. That's one of the issues with the Cortex. You know, you get plenty of pressure behind it, but then once it hits that crumbly spot, it doesn't matter how much pressure you've got, it just kind of crumbles. I think I can get that once I get narrow. I'm going to get very narrow with this, so as long as I can get enough leverage, because once it starts getting very narrow, it'll rock a lot when I'm trying to pressure flake it. You know, it'll be rocking a lot. So we'll see. Yeah, that's the kind of pressure flake I need. Okay, I'm going to switch over to smaller. Hopefully I can finish this up before the 30 minutes. These are very subtle features. Oops. I still have a lot of Cortex there. Might end up being a little bit thicker than the original. I think there's a side profile. Yeah, the side profile, it looks pretty thick, so I'm pretty safe, but it might end up being really thick. want to thin down the tip too much at this stage. I don't want it to snap off on me because I still got to do a lot of aggressive pressure. That little bump there is going to give me some trouble, looks like. I got a bump on both sides. Yeah, I've got some crushing there. I'm trying to power through that crumbly edge. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Luckily, I can go really narrow on this. Pretty much like a drill. It may not be enough to get in there. Now that I've crushed it quite a bit. I'm kind of rushing it too because I want to get this video done before it gets too late. Huh. I don't know. I don't know if you can see that. Just when I think I have enough pressure on it, it stops short of going across the center of the piece. I may have a slight chance at it, but I don't know. Maybe time to get a slotted pad. I used them in the beginning, but I didn't like them because I snapped too many points. But for these kind of things, these kind of issues, might be a good idea. Because I think I'm wrestling against or wrestling with the pad to get the kind of results I want. Although, if it wasn't domed, I don't know if I could put this much pressure on it. With a slot, it might just snap. Very risky. Sorry, it looks like a lot of this video might not be in focus. Alright, so kind of crude, but I think we're almost done here. Actually, I think we're good. Just looking at the picture, and the edges are fairly erratic, so I don't have to worry too much. Still some big crusty spots in the middle that I don't like, but oh well. It almost looks like they had little notches on the sides. Okay, so there you go. The base is very subtle. It has just very subtle indentations. So yeah, it's in between. The thickness is comparable, I think. The profile is kind of erratic, and you've got some thick spots. I see some cortex maybe here, or some defect in the stone, maybe here too, so it doesn't really matter too much. These look a little bit upturned, but I'm not going to do anything like that. These look like they've got deeper serrations than what I have. But I'm going to call it good. It's already 30 minutes, so I think I got lucky in the middle here with a couple of pressure flakes. That's a very delicate point. It's very unusual, I think, this style. But it looks like you can make points out of substandard material easily with, well, fairly easily with this technique. It's kind of like a drill, right? The diamond cross section. All right.